For almost 30 years now, I have created my artworks on black canvas. Black has always fascinated me. I remember when I was a young child, I had trouble getting into bed because I was afraid of the darkness under the bed. Then I understood that, to survive, I had to become comfortable with the dark. Black fascinates me because it stimulates our imagination. The brain is fed by the dark. For me, that's how it works. So, starting with a black canvas, I then take a white pencil and start to draw the first lines, and from there, well, I think that the magic transcends through this blackness. It's quite fascinating. Well, I was born in 1965 in a small Ontario countryside, Glen Nevis. There was a church, there was a river, and there was us. We had several large fields, we had a farm. I would imagine and make up stories. It was in line with my personality. I would get lost in the fields, I'd get lost with the dogs, I'd get lost everywhere in the countryside. Farm life brings us in close contact with life and death. Necessarily, there were many winters where animals would die, where they wouldn't make it through the winters because they were sick. And the eye of this animal looking at me, knowing that it's about to die in the next second, and it's in this eye. It's this message which I have kept throughout, this transfer of messages between this animal and this eye, which was somewhat becoming the common thread of all my work, in architecture and even now in painting. I think that architecture is present in my artwork through my characters that I've created, well anchored to the ground and which go up vertically towards the skies, subtly in an environment which is their own. I draw a few lines from a building which emerges from the background and which almost disappears. Architecture is omnipresent without necessarily being 100% present. The earth and the skies have always fascinated me. Until I was 20 years old, I had been an altar boy for quite a long time because I'd found the ceremonial aspect of it to be beautiful. I think it was the large spaces, the cathedrals, the churches, the countryside, the music, the incense. In fact, what strikes me by the loss of a loved one is precisely the emptiness that is left afterwards. And it is this fragility that I like to incorporate in my paintings. Even when my paintings may look very colorful and powerful, I always feel this little common thread that has always followed me since a very young age. In a way, all these monuments are people because people were very present everywhere in my work, in architecture or in painting. My work is very much centered on humans. I was reading about Aldo Rossi on how a cemetery is like the inverted mirror of its city, between the city of the living and that of the dead. At the beginning, when I made the leap to painting, I didn't quite have the financial means to buy all the oil painting essentials, so I started with wax pastel. At that time, I found it more pleasant to touch the material rather than to have a tool, a distance between the canvas and my hand. I then discovered oil sticks, which is a substance that does not dry without the use of a fixative. This was more aligned with my own style. It allowed me to become a sculptor of the material. I was touching the material, touching the canvas, almost touching the curves of the shapes I was sculpting on my canvas. I feel like part of the artist is always transcended through either their fingers or their brush. In 2004, I had the opportunity to work on an event that I entitled The Excess of the Coveted. This event subsequently opened many doors for me. One of my art pieces was exhibited at a nearby hotel, and it was largely viewed, partly through telescopes. So people were viewing the artworks from the 8th floor. As a matter of fact, everything was in excess, and it struck the viewer's imagination, the enthusiasts and collectors of Besner. I worked on a book entitled Mora. It's a story that I created, and it took me 5 years to write it. I developed the characters and then, with the help of my team, brought the story to life. We sought out artistic directors and then developed an event, a second event that struck the imagination of collectors and art lovers. Cirque du Soleil showed great interest in my artworks and became a major collector. Guy Laliberté later met with me and invited me to start working on another project, Besner's interpretation of the Love Show performed in Las Vegas, in which Cirque du Soleil produced on the history of the Beatles. Neil Aspinall, who happens to be the manager of the Beatles, acquired this art piece. The departure of this piece then took me to Morocco, where designers were combining Besner's art in the making of Moroccan caftans. This led me to the Villa des Arts Museum in Casablanca, as well as that of Rabat, followed by exhibitions in Morocco. I had several exhibitions in China, including solos, which ended with the Suzhou Museum. The railroad reminds me a lot of my childhood. We had big tracks that went through the fields. In the mind of my 10-year-old self, a railroad consisted of rails that went around the globe and came back. I thought that if I kept going in this direction, I would be back here one day. It was a continuous circle. This same line is more or less that common thread from my childhood to the artist that I have become, a line from which we can pick all the pieces that fed my childhood, my teenage years, up to the artist that I am today. And I believe that there is a link with the railroad track. It's this common thread, it's the track of my life.